Welcome everyone to this special occasion, the dissertation defense of Connors John McConville, who will present his work here today. I'm Helge Osterhold, one of the core faculty members here at the East-West Psychology program, and it happened to be my pleasure largely and honor always to work with Connors over these last few years on his dissertation. I want to introduce the rest of the committee and then tell you a little bit about just how this occasion will unfold, and then I'll pass it on for the presentation to Connors. So let me introduce everyone. I want to introduce first our external member. Ruben Habito is a professor of world religions and spirituality and the director of spiritual formation at Perkins School of Theology at the Southern Methodist University. Before coming to SMU, he taught at the Jesuit-founded Sophia University in Japan for many years. And while in Japan, he received Zen training for many years under Koun Yamada Roshi and is an authorized Zen teacher in the Sanbo Zen International lineage, serving as a guiding teacher of Maria Kannon Zen Center based in Dallas, Texas. He is the author of numerous books and articles in English and Japanese, including Be Still and Now, Zen and the Bible. He also authored Zen and the Spiritual Exercises, Experiencing Buddhism, Ways of Wisdom and Compassion, amongst others. Welcome, Ruben. I want to also introduce and welcome Debashish Banerjee, who is the second member of the committee. Debashish is the Haridas Chowdhury Professor of Indian Philosophies and Cultures and the Doshi Professor of Asian Arts at CIIS. He's also the chair of our program of East-West Psychology. And prior to CIIS, he served as a professor of Indian Studies and Dean of Academics at the University of Philosophical Research in Los Angeles. His interests lie in postmodern, postcolonial, and post-human approaches to Indian philosophy, psychology, and culture. Dr. Banerjee has curated close to 15 exhibitions of Indian and Japanese art. He's authored and edited around 10 books and art catalogs on major figures of the Bengal Renaissance and the spiritual thinker Sri Aurobindo, on critical posthumanism, yoga psychology, and a variety of creative and art-related projects. Welcome, Debashish.
Thank you, Helge.
And I just want to let everybody know about the structure of this dissertation defense. So we'll, in a minute, give the microphone to Connors. He has around 45 minutes or so to present the work. And after the presentation, each of us committee members has some time for comments, assessments, merits of the work, and ask the candidate a few questions. And after that, the committee will retreat into a separate room and discuss and decide whether any changes are needed or if the work is approved as it stands. And during that time, you, the audience, gets a chance to also engage with Connor, ask questions, give comments to the presentation and the work. And the dissertation then concludes when the committee returns and we announce our decision. And we should be done in about 2 hours. Okay, well, then let's do this, I say. And Connors, you are the man of the hour. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'll share my screen. So this is a dissertation on aging. The title is Aging in the Lives of Contemplatives, and I'll speak more about that. Can you all hear me? Is there any problems with hearing? No. Okay, well then I'll move forward. I plan on taking about 45 minutes in summarizing the dissertation. I first want to thank Helge Osterhold, my dissertation chair, and for the ways he's nudged me to think a little bit more and a little bit deeper and for your support. Thank you very much, Helge. I'd also like to thank my committee members, Debashish Banerjee and Ruben Habito, for agreeing to do this. And I cannot thank you enough. And lastly, I want to thank Ann Kinney, who was somewhat of a dissertation doula for me, helping me to articulate my ideas and sharing her APA wisdom with me. So this dissertation brings together several bodies of information. First, the analyses of the interviews I held with two participants, one a Southern Buddhist, also known as Theravadan, and one an Ignatian practitioner. I will discuss, of course, their spiritual traditions just a bit to familiarize you with them. But also it brings together their interviews with the knowledge and wisdom of the Jungian theory of individuation and with the psychosocial development theory of Erik Erikson. So my question, do we age just for ourselves or do we age for others? And what does that mean? I came across this quote of Carl Jung in his essay, Stages of Life, that expanded my inquiry because there seemed to be something about our longevity that has meaning for the species. So I wondered, how are we to age? So just describing age, I don't think of it as a number. I think of it more in what Jung says, a deep-seated and peculiar change of the psyche. And for any of you who are aging, you probably know what I mean. So it's an intuitive sense that something has shifted. I love this definition of Jung. He compares aging to the sun rising, the youth shines its light. And when it reaches its zenith, it says, here I am, this is my persona. This is who I've created. And at a certain point, the sun begins to set and the rays turn inward, and so do we. So this is a dissertation about how we turn inwards, what happens when we turn inwards, and what do we hear from our aging experience. And so I come across this question. I asked contemplatives, what is the meaning and purpose of their aging? How do they experience aging? I asked contemplatives because I assumed that they had an experience of turning inwards. And from that turning inwards, they may have information to share. So a contemplative, what is a contemplative? In general, it's a person who is looking for the truth and someone who can sit and listen and wonder. In the Buddhist tradition, they talk about contemplation as deepening wisdom. And so let's take a breath. This is a picture of the Mekong River just about 5 miles away from where I live. The Mekong River is said to be over 17 million years old. It's wide and it's deep, and it's a metaphor for me of aging. In fact, all of the pictures in this slide presentation are pictures that I've taken over the last 5 years of being here in northern Thailand. So in many ways, the land has taught me about what it means to get older. So I will briefly go through a literary review. I can't possibly name all of the people that have been important to me in this literary review, but I'll try my best to go through the main ones. So statistics tell us that our people over 60 is growing in numbers. It's multiplying year by year by year, so aging is not going away. But aging is not always that easy to discuss. Ronald Blythe, in his book, The View in Winter, talks about it being fugitive. little seen, and yet it's all around us. And Cole tells us that aging is diverse as there are people. So what do we do? Well, Simone de Beauvoir had some wisdom in saying, well, let's look at the constants of aging. What are they? And we all experience when we're aging the nearness of death. Does that mean that we're just in physical decline? Does that mean that there's no place or purpose for us anymore? Cole asked the question, do we master aging or do we accept it? And if we accept it, what does that mean? So biomedical science tells us that aging is a problem to be solved. And in fact, there's a famous doctor, David Sinclair, at Harvard University doing a lot of research on aging. And in his book, Lifespan, a bestseller, he says that he believes aging is a disease and that it's treatable. And I wonder, how long is it treatable for? And how much money does it cost? But more than that, I wonder, what about what's going on inside of us? What is the value of that? So if it's just a physical problem, then the experience, the inner experience has no meaning. So in the literary review, I tried to discover what are the generative properties of aging. And I looked at different theories from psychology, sociology, spirituality, gerontology, to see what they had to tell us. Erik Erikson's theory popped out at me because it is inclusive of old age. And there's something wise in the sense that there are stages that we go through. And there are unique tasks to each stage, and they're all interconnected. Daniel Levinson is another theorist that included old age into his structure, into his theory. And what I thought was insightful was that we do have periods of stability where things are moving along just fine, and then something happens and there's a transition. Either it's an interior experience that I have to move on, or there's a physical experience that changes our lives. There's this Hindu theory, ashrama, where there's the student's life, the household life, the retired life, and the life of a renunciate. And according to this, I'm a renunciate, but I haven't retired yet. So it doesn't always come in order, but there's some wisdom here, about what our lives are about. There's also this wonderful teaching in Zen Buddhism called the 10 ox herding pictures. Just looking at the pictures alone is an experience of enlightenment, maybe short-lived, but it really is telling. And Murray Stein has a wonderful article, Murray Stein being a Jungian psychologist and writer, and writes a lot about individuation. There's an article called Psychological Individuation and Spiritual Enlightenment, some comparisons and points of contact, and I recommend it to everyone. It's beautiful. Harold Moody, a Jungian psychoanalyst and a gerontologist, believes that our development is of a spiritual nature. And as we age, it's an interior summons. Edmund Sherman is along these same lines, and he believes that with aging, we have a greater sense of communion with the spirit of the universe, which I find inspiring. Studies in spirituality and aging tell us that it's difficult to actually quantify spirituality. So they use markers like well-being and longevity to help us understand that those with spirituality or religious traditions seem to have more well-being and to seem to live longer. Susan McFadden tells us that Making meaning, which spirituality helps us to do, is another factor in contributing to well-being. Moberg, who's been studying aging and spirituality for a long time, has written several books on it, discusses how spirituality is so intimate and of our essence, and so it's very hard to directly observe. There's a theory called disengagement theory that was prominent in the 40s and 50s, that said turning inwards was really a healthy thing for older people. But that became kind of poo-pooed in the 60s and 70s, where people were saying, oh, you need to be actively involved to have a sense of satisfaction. Lars Tornstam, a Swedish doctor, created the theory of gerotranscendence, and he revisited this theory and said, oh no, people do experience going inward, and it does create something that's important for us. And these are some of the things, and one that stuck out for me is a decrease of self-centeredness. And here are some more, what happens to us as we age. And you may recognize this in your own selves. We become less fearful of death, and there seems to be more integrity in our lives, if we're lucky. Jung plays a big part in this dissertation. He looked at life, there's the first half of life and the second half of life, and I love this simplicity. The first half of life, we build our ego, our persona, establish our identity in the world, and in the second half of life, we begin to see what no longer makes sense, what no longer gives us meaning, and where we need other nurturing. And then it's more of a tendency to turn inwards, to look at our souls and what nurtures us. Erik Erikson also plays a big role in this dissertation. And one of the reasons I chose him or was attracted to him is his 8th stage, the last stage of our development, which he calls integrity versus despair. Despair being an interior sense, loss of an interior sense of confidence that our life really has purpose. Integrity, however, teaches us how to embrace the whole of ourselves, what we feel as failures and what we feel are our successes. So let's take another breath. Discussing methodology. I chose the holistic content perspective. I chose it because this method actually made me excited to work with it. Felt like I was working with when I was working with the narratives, the interviews, I felt like they were alive for me and that I could interrelate with them. It allows me space for my own intuition to have a voice. It gave me a way to let the narrative speak to me. It gave me logical guidelines to follow, such as examining how a participant will speak about something and how often, and also what are the things that the participant has left out. So I get to see the whole in reading the whole interviews, and then I can pick out themes that seem important. And I can trust myself in doing so, which this method encourages. I chose 2 participants. I wasn't looking for a saturation of information that I could apply to a generic group of people, but instead, I was looking for thick descriptions, deeper thoughts, deeper discussions. So I interviewed each participant twice, 1 hour each. And from that, I created a narrative for both, or it created with me a narrative for both, so to speak. So nothing is done alone. So I will go now into what the thematic analysis of the 2 participants is. And so, and that I will bring into relationship with Jungian individuation and psychosocial development theory of Erik Erikson. So I named my first participant Tanawat, and he's an Thai Ignatian contemplative. So what is that? It's based on Ignatian spirituality, and if you know a Jesuit priest, you may know what Ignatian spirituality is, but Ignatian spirituality is really quite ubiquitous, not only in the Catholic Church, but in the Christian tradition, especially in spiritual direction. Two of the definitions of Ignatian spirituality is a contemplative in action and a person for others. They're informed, of course, by the words of Jesus in the Gospels, and there's a dedication to serving God through what they've learned through the words of Jesus. So the preamble, called the principle and foundation of the spiritual exercise, is basically about a goal, which is to praise and reverence God, and to let go of anything else that gets in the way of that. And so it's detachment and discernment. So looking at the holistic content perspective analysis of Tanawat, I saw 4 themes coming forward. Tanawat worked in the city. There he found his place and purpose, serving others. But he met a health crisis, and it stopped him in his tracks. It caused him to rethink his life and to see if he's going to continue to work or is he going to die? How will he be able to be in the world? He did recover after about 3 years and a very serious operation. And then he called it a slight annoyance, which seems kind of trivial, seems to deny what was going on. Which we will discuss later about his personality, but it certainly made him human. So Tanawat did notice that his illness changed him. And there was an inner movement that caused him to be less attached to his own desires and will. He accepted his weakness as an older person and saw that people appreciated it. In the theme connection and wholeness, those are the 2 words he used to describe his spirituality. He senses that in communion with nature and with God, he experienced wholeness. Wholeness is not as what he was before, but with the changes in his life, wholeness now is accepting reality. The theme of fear and mystery arose when he started speaking of death. He had an experience that was both a dream and when he was dreaming and half asleep, sort of in between. And he met his own death, and he said that he felt that he was in the midst of something he didn't know. And it caused him some fear, and it caused him a sense of being alone. But he didn't shy away from it. He reflected on it, which in some ways all we can do. I'll move now to Santisuk. He was a Thai Buddhist contemplative. He's a Buddhist monk. And a little bit about Buddhism. A big principle is conditioned phenomenon. Basically, the philosophy is that there's impermanence everywhere. We're all impermanent. We experience unsatisfactoriness. And along with that, there's no self. There's what he calls not self. Stepping away from the self. And Buddhadasa Bhikkhu is a mentor of Santisuk's. And he says that the Buddhist teaching is a skillful means that help people to let go, to stop clinging. And of course, there's the Four Noble Truths that most people know about Buddhism. So let's look at the thematic analysis of Santisuk's. 4 themes arose: responsibility and opportunity, elders as teachers, age as change, birth, age, illness, death, and nibbana. Santisuk chose to be a monk at the early age of 12. In a way, it was a duty of his. He saw that it was important for him to make merit for his family. Of course, it followed the tradition of his culture. But he also knew it was an opportunity to develop himself through study. He never expected to get an education, much less a doctoral degree. And if he was to ask as a child, would you believe that you were going to do this? He would have said, no way. Elders, when he spoke of elders as teachers, he was also speaking of himself. He realized now that he was a teacher. But he had faith in the Dharma. He experienced that from his teachers. He trusted them. He heard their stories and how to develop oneself. And if he didn't listen to them and didn't talk to them, he said, how would I have known? So teachers play a big role. He used the word serm sap, a Thai word that means to absorb, when he, to absorb his religion, his spirituality, and to absorb even the life of elders. He lived with a preceptor in his early years, helping him out, which is tradition in Thailand. He saw how the old man lived, and he gained a lot of respect for him. And he also said that he absorbed the age of his teacher. He realized and recognized change in himself. The body changes, and he talked about bad teeth and slippery floors, and he had to be careful when walking and had to go to the dentist more often than he liked to. But he also saw that it gave him opportunities to connect with others on a deeper level. He also saw that aging was an experience of being less self-centered. Last theme, he saw this as the Dharma, as truth. And there's something that brings nobility to the experience of aging and illness and death. He used this definition from Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, the coolness resulting from the quenching of defilements. So with that definition, you can see that nibbana is something that can be temporary, and it's something that can be lasting. So let's take another breath. So this is an analysis of my participants' narratives through the lens of the Jungian theory of individuation. So I will go through what individuation is briefly, and then I will go through each participant and their themes to see where there seems to be connection. Individuation. Jung used somewhat of a poetic description. So this feels like something breaks through in our consciousness, in the way we live, an interior sense, a spiritual awakening that just happens. Again, it could be temporary, only a few seconds, or it could last a day or two. And for some, a long time. So in doing an analysis, specifically, I had to find out how am I going to do this? And so I look for two things. One, in the narratives, where does there seem to be a separation from conscious and unconscious collective influences? And secondly, where is there a grounding and expansion of the ego personality and growing into the deeper sense of self? So I look for these two things in the narratives to see if they're present. So let's start with Tanawat. So through his speaking about himself and his work, there seemed to be an interior union between who he was and his vocation. So the question that arose for me, both for Tanawat and for Santisuk, was it just their persona? Was it just that first stage in life where you're establishing your identity that they decided to be spiritual and religious and take on a robe? Or was there something more authentic? He seemed to be united in a deep way with the work he believed he was supposed to do in the world. Tanawat also had a trickster about him, and a trickster is an archetype in Jungian psychology, a shadow figure, mercurial in nature that likes to play. And age in some ways gave Tanawat permission to play. He told a story of going to the sky train with a cane, and he said, I really didn't need the cane, but if I got to the sky train with the cane, people would give me a seat. And then he chuckled. So he could play with his aging. So it's somewhat reflective about, oh, now I'm aging and now I'm not. When is it convenient to be old? Tanawat's students compared him to a durian, which has a big fruit. It's called the king of fruits in Thailand, big thorns on the outside. But you break it open, it's soft, and depending on your taste, it's quite delicious on the inside. So Tanawat had a threatening personality, and his students said he was manipulative. But then he says, you know, with age, attributing it to his age, I'm better now. I don't do that anymore. So I thought that was charming. If the ego person is in contact with the larger field of the unconscious, the individual is more inclusive, less self-centered. Tanawat was moved by the words, love one another, and it seemed to have woven into the fabric of his being. And I take that phrase from Murray Stein, who likened the process of transformation to alchemy, when a substance that is regarded as one thing goes through a process, be it water or fire or whatever, and becomes something else. And here the words, love one another, the words of Jesus, seem to have, through contemplation and action, moved him in such a way that this love for others was woven into the fabric of his being. So in connection and wholeness, he seemed to be connecting deeply with his community. He was alive, he was himself, and he was changing. And this expansion of consciousness in Jungian psychology is a symbol of totality. So Jung asked this wonderful question: is a person related to something infinite or not? And he thought it was a decisive question. And I think for Tanawat, he would resoundingly say yes. So becoming whole is not something that just is an end thing. It's something that's always in process. Tanawat was in connection with fear and mystery. And Jung says that the world is infinite and ungraspable. And that's part of being whole, knowing that and letting that be. So Tanawat definitely opened the door to the mystery of life. And from that, he was willing to listen and to learn and not to run away. So let's go to Santisuk. Again, the question arose, was it just a persona that he was acting out, or was there something authentic? And Buddhadasa Bhikkhu talks about duty. And when it's fulfilled, the fruit of doing that duty correctly is nature, and nature is realized. Stein tells us that a psychological persona becomes inscribed when it taken on as a way of adapting to the specific demands of a given cultural environment. And Santisuk's Buddhist environment was something that influenced him. And by putting on the robes and attuning his heart and mind to the Dharma, it seemed that he was choosing something that was liberating and living authentically. So discussing elders and teachers, he emphasized that it's something, living the Dharma is something you don't do alone. You do in community. And this is very evident in Thailand. There's less emphasis on the individual and more emphasis on the group, on the community, on the family. So the wise old man, the teacher, is many things. And they teach transformative practices. And in Buddhism, samatha, calming of the body, and vipassana, insights. So when you're calm, you're ready for insight. In the West, we use also Jungian psychoanalysis, and more in the East too, an opportunity to bring forward what is unconscious, to bring the shadow into our consciousness. And I propose that aging does this too. Santisuk said, with age, we become less attached to things, and we learn to let go. So individuation teaches detachment as well, withdrawing from the self. In aging, birth, illness, death, and nibbana, Santisuk said, birth is in every stage, and age is in every stage. So somehow or another, even as an infant, we know what it means to age. Jung says that we need to be in contact with death, and he even sees it as a goal. And if we shrink from it, there's something unhealthy about it, and it robs ourselves of what we're living for, of who we are, of what is our purpose. Santisuk sort of was along the same lines here. Liberation is only comes about unless we keep in mind our death. Costello, a Jungian psychoanalyst and spiritual teacher, sees it as formlessness, and that it has sort of a life of its own that we don't create, but creates for us and with us. Going on to chapter 6, this is where I analyze the stories, the narratives of my two participants through the lens of Erik Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. So let's just take a deep breath, letting the river wash over us. Briefly, there are 8 stages, and I'll just run through them quickly. So if you look at the strengths, hope, will, purpose, competence, fidelity, love, care, wisdom, you're looking at something pretty spectacular. And when we're aging, it's wonderful to have some of these strengths, if not all of them, to help us through the experience, to help us believe in the experience, to help us continue to pursue what is this that I'm going through and how do I use it best for myself and others. So in doing the analysis, I look at crisis. Is there a crisis that appears in the narratives? How does it change them? Do they carry on as usual or do they make a change? I also look to see if there's despair. And I look to see if there's integrity. A couple other definitions of integrity, Rohrer, I like, is forgiving reality. And Chichester, the courage to surrender to one's future. Erikson uses the word responsible renunciation, which speaks of detachment and letting go. So let's look at Tanawat first. Speaking of his health crisis, comes against the status quo. And he was pushed by his fidelity to his work. I have to keep working. And how is my illness going to affect how I work? But he does make a change, something that's more consulting, and he begins to discover translation, that he's good at it. But there's a certain kind of the seventh stage, generativity, caring for others that in his work, even in the change of his work. But what Erikson says is that its sanctions are disregard for death. And that sort of is in line with Tanawat, is that sometimes he didn't want to be old. So let's keep working. Integrity appeared in the fact that he started to recognize his character flaws, and he began to admit that into his own sense of wholeness. He began to receive gifts from others, whereas before he could not. And I think any of us, whether we're old or not, may find it difficult to receive. But he saw that it was a way to care for others, and it was a wise thing to do. Tanawat makes an annual retreat every year, and in doing so, in one reflection, he saw that he was doing things to gain popularity and to fulfill his own will. So he decided to make a change, or he was moved to make a change. Spirituality for him is connecting. So he saw it's connecting with self, others, and God. Erikson tells us that affiliation with the community helps to stabilize and support a person as they create intimate relationships. So in his community, he saw a way of deepening, trusting himself to others. So as we mentioned before, wholeness is more a process than a destination, a process of accepting reality. In fear and mystery, when someone is close to fear and mystery, as Tanawat was, he said that he began to feel more compassion. So it opened his heart to care. So there's a generativity that emerges with fear and mystery. And he says, now, the meaning of my age is sharing with others, because they too have to face reality. Erikson goes on to tell us something that we heard from Simone de Beauvoir in the beginning, is that we are living in the nearness of death, in the nearness of unknowable future. And we also must confront what Erikson calls non-being, and maybe even our existential identity. So one thing that emerges in his fear and mystery in facing his own demise, his own death, is his sense of trust. With trust, Erikson tells us, come hope. And with hope, we can see that our hypocrisies and failures and tragedies are not the end, but move us to something that we still don't know, but certainly an opening of the heart. And Tanawada expresses this by saying he believes that his life is has worth and value. Lastly, let's go to Santisuk. When Santisuk became a monk, he began to develop competence, studying the Dharma, serving his preceptor, and fidelity, learning how to be faithful to his relationships. He trusted his teachers and learned to develop trust through their words because he saw it was nature, it was the Dharma. And he developed hope, which really is balancing trust and mistrust. Care emerged as a teacher. He saw himself caring for his students, that he forgave their foibles, the ways they were late or didn't hand in their homework. He saw that he was no longer angry, but seemed to accept them, encourage them. He saw that his life was not his own, but it belonged to the generations that followed. Erikson tells us that when we age, we meet abrupt prohibitions. Some of you may have met some abrupt prohibitions. I know I have. And Santisuk says, as a result, we cannot grasp onto anything, even one sense of self. Santisuk was very adamant. Once you know your purpose, you do it now, don't wait. His purpose, he said, was to make peace in the world. And one of the ways he did it was through interreligious dialogue. And he was quite faithful to that mission. So once we know the Dharma, we have a way to liberation. Freedom from desire and greed, living in the present moment, which means for many, more kindness and more compassion seems to emerge with that. I love this quote, because death is ahead of us. We will choose to benefit ourselves and others by doing good. Such a simple statement, but so profound. Again, Nibbana, Santisuk spoke of it in the words of Buddhadasa. We all experience these moments. And Buddhadasa tells us that we need these moments to create a certain freshness and vitality to go on living. So let's take another deep breath. And lastly, some reflections, personal reflections after studying all of this. I really began, I guess, living on this land and listening to the truths of Buddhism and Catholicism and Christianity. Just experience aging as nature. It's the Dharma. Aging is living nature itself. So we're living truth within us as we age. Aging is also culture. And for Jung, that was to become conscious, to make the unconscious conscious. Aging is living. So for me, aging is a time to go a little bit deeper and to step into the darkness and the emptiness that I experience from time to time. In doing so, however, I experience more compassion for myself and others. Aging can be compared to a dark night. I see it as an experience of the present moment with no filters. We often meet a crisis again. So even though we've worked it out one time in one stage, we have to re-navigate it in another stage under new circumstances. And that is life, and that is aging. So certainly aging has taken away some of the identity that I have had, and perhaps all of it at one time. So in the 10 ox-herding pictures, the last one is of a man who has gone through this experience of enlightenment, and he returns to the marketplace, lives again in the chaos that was always there. But in the midst of it, he has a sense of playfulness and inner freedom. And if you're living around someone who is aging and seems to be playful and seems to have an inner freedom, you might understand that they've taken their aging to heart and they've learned from it and let it enlighten them. Lastly, so as I come to the end, I once again want to thank my dissertation chair, Helge Osterhold. He has been so kind and supportive in this experience. And I'd like to thank my committee members, 2 scholars and spiritual guides I deeply admire, Debashish Banerjee and Ruben Habito. Thank you so much. And that's the end. So we'll come back and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Connors, for this. I'll say more about my impressions of this, but let's give a round of applause for now. I don't want to get into feedback. Thank you. And we will have, I don't know, maybe about 10 minutes or so for each committee member to ask some questions, make some comments, have a little bit of a back and forth. You're welcome to pass it on. And if another question or comment comes back, we'll give the mic back to you afterwards. I'd like to invite our external expert and committee member, Ruben Habito, to give you the opportunity first to engage with Connors. Any comments on the merits of his work, on the presentation today, any questions you want to ask them, and have a bit of a dialogue with him, and then we'll move on to Debashish from there.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer my accolades for this work, where I see that you have really carefully reflected on the matter and have laid out the methodology very meticulously in the beginning, and then laid out what you're going to do, and then you did it, and then at the end you reflected on it, which is a very Jesuit kind of procedure. I remember you say what you're going to do, and then you do it, and then you say that you did it. So the structure is complete, very Jesuit-like. Thank you. I also spent 25 years of my life in the Jesuits, so I kind of share that background and that appreciation of this spiritual tradition. So thank you for that. So I have many detailed questions, but since I only have 10 minutes, let me just go to one central one that jumps at me as I read. So you have chosen 2 very how would you put it? Well, normal individuals, but who just went through the path of contemplation as their Christian and then their Buddhist backgrounds led them to. And so they were able to come to a process, to a stage of aging that you described as really very laudable and very admirable, and which we are all human beings capable of also following. But then the question comes, there are just some individuals who have aged to a point where rather than becoming mellow, rather than becoming soft like what you described of these two individuals, they become grumpy or complaining or more self-obsessed. So where would you see the difference between what these two have undertaken and those who unfortunately do not become more mellow and do not become more human, but become rather more irritable and fearful of death and so on? Just that first that one, and then I may have a couple of minor ones later.
I've thought about this, Ruben. When I worked for hospice, which I did for 10 years as a spiritual care counselor, I noticed that some people were so gracious at the end of life, were so willing to accept their experience, whether their family was chaotic or not. They seemed to have an inner peace and a certain joy. And then I noticed other people were just as mad as hell. And one of the questions I got most of all is, why is this happening to me? And I would think, well, it's because you're a human being. So I wondered about what makes the difference. And part of me says, it's unknowable. Why do some people turn in one way and others turn in another? One thing that I think is really helpful to look at is being somewhat influenced by Jung and Erikson is, what was the early part of our life all about? Did we receive enough nurturing to experience trust? And as Erikson tells us, if we trust, we can hope in our future. So we don't see these negative things, what we call negative, as diminishments, but as ways to move forward into our own heart, our own soul. And so sometimes I think, well, maybe it's because they lacked trust and because they didn't have an experience of hope in their future. So that's one answer that I give. I think at a certain point we do make decisions, and that it's not just completely on fate, but we make decisions, and we make decisions. Am I going to open to this experience, or am I going to close up? And maybe some people don't even reflect on that. They just go with instinct. So in that way, I would say, maybe they're living their karma. They're living their instinct, but they're not living their culture. And their culture is to make the unconscious conscious. You can do it. And so that's what I would urge people to do myself.
Thank you. I would like to continue thinking with you about this and in our future and ongoing conversations. Really, this is one point. What makes for that difference between growing old gracefully in the way you describe these two individuals and those who don't? And so maybe what you said earlier, that there may be something to do with the way they live their life from childhood on, whether they were able to find themselves on good ground or whether they were still just living based on external pressures or external expectations, and really never found that sense of self-affirmation. So maybe there's something to that, and you hinted at that, so thank you. Well, my other question is related to that. In some parts of your dissertation, you noted that the awareness of death, both in the Christian, with the memento mori tradition, and then of course in Buddhism, they meditate on death. They look at dead bodies and then they sit with that and meditate on that and not realize that it's going to happen to them. So two different kinds of outcome. One is becoming fearful, that fear that you described, and the other one is overcoming that fear and accepting it and precisely becoming at peace with oneself and at peace with one's death. So where would you see again that difference in those two kinds of responses to the recollection of death, or having death in front of oneself as something that can make one appreciate life all the more, or something that can make one more afraid?
Yeah, I've often thought of some of these meditations on death as quite morbid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why would I want to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I also see that some of it is very useful. And I don't think we have to meditate too long on a dead body.
Mm-hmm.
When we're growing old, there is a sense that death is near,
Mm-hmm.
whether you like it or not. And
Right.
so in some way or another, just living brings us close to death as we get older. But one of the things I think about is, has the person been able to be playful in their life? Have they been able to be creative in their life?
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think there's something about dancing with death,
Mm.
that brings a certain liberation, that I'm not going into this darkness,
Mm-hmm.
feeble and alone and sad, but that I'm going in with courage and with playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And that opens the imagination to experience something more,
Mm-hmm.
because there is something more there, and people tell us there is.
Correct.
So
Indeed, yeah, that's really something that keeps confronting us with how can we confront death and then experience freedom from it. And the one hint that I'm looking at is Ramana Maharshi, who at 16 years old was so fearful of death that he decided he was going to look at it straight in the face, and he meditated in a way that he put himself with a fact that in a situation where he actually died to himself. He imagined having died. And from there, the opening of his life began, from what I understand. Anyway, that's one hint that I'm looking at. But I think our colleague Debashish might have something more to offer regarding Ramana Maharshi. Thank you. I think I've exhausted my 10 minutes, so I'll just stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can come back to you if there's any more burning questions that arise also in the next 10 minutes or so.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Connors, firstly, for that. I think very contemplative, sort of portrayal of your dissertation. It was presented very well. I read the dissertation. It was very eloquent. Your language and your ability to convey it was extremely, appropriate and moving, actually, as well as the incisiveness of your analysis. I loved all of it. My question to you, actually, in a way, sort of mirrors what was said by Ruben in his first question, because that's the question that came to me as I was reading and I was listening to you. It seemed that your choice of sort of, persons, like your selection criteria for persons for your, methodology, which is a narrative methodology, are very much like you in a way, Connors. They're almost like alter egos of yourself in many, many ways. They're contemplatives. They are sort of engaged in interfaith dialogue. They're both, practicing sort of Jesuit Christianity and Buddhism. So there's a lot of overlap between you, these characters, as well as these two traditions that you're looking at, the whole sort of aspect of contemplation. So related to that, I had a question relating to the objectives and methodology that you state in your dissertation. And I'd like to put it like this, that it seems to me that your, I mean, the eventuality is aging as a process of individuation and wisdom. This seems to me to be what you're putting forward as an eventuality, almost like a natural eventuality that, as you say, following Jung from the beginning, that this is the process by which we enter the evening of our lives. So I'd ask you whether, see, I'm going to present 4 ways of looking at your presentation of this objective or eventuality. Are you testing this eventuality as a hypothesis? That is the first one. The second one is, are you detailing the conditions under which this is possible? In other words, are you stating that it is contemplatives who allow this to actually, manifest? The third one is, are you just giving us good examples of this eventuality, people whose lives portray this? Or are you presenting and analyzing replicas of yourself as aging contemplatives with an object to, you mentioned a little bit of this as well, that in a way you're coming to terms with your own aging. So how would you look at it methodologically in terms of these 4 options? How would you see your own presentation?
I wouldn't expect any other question from you, devotees. You have that mind, don't you? In some ways, it's all 4. I do state in my methodology that I'm somewhat biased. Not somewhat, I am. So I try to be transparent about that. And I realize that I'm not speaking for all. And we all have unique experiences, and there's, for some, a pushback. I think in some ways, I'm saying this is an opportunity that we have. And I think that was the biggest drive. I'm a realist in many ways. I've worked with people who have been nasty till the end, and in some ways I've learned from them as well. Even contemplatives, they can get pretty mean. So I know it's not universal. But I also feel like aging is precious. It's a precious moment in life. And it's an opportunity to deepen our humanity and to extend our lives to others. So it's sort of an exhortation or a teaching as well. But more than anything, I'm saying there's evidence here that this can happen. And I'm also saying that anyone who reads this, I imagine there are some moments in it that they can identify with. We ignore some of our most important moments of enlightenment. As though it's just another thing. Why don't we take time with it and be with it? There is an art to listening. And so I'm offering this as an opportunity. This is something that we can do. I don't know if that completely answers your question.
To some extent, Connors, I'm left wondering again, as I said, that the choice of your subjects. I mean, each one of these options opens a different kind of set in terms of the choice of subjects. I think, to some extent, it seems that grappling with your own aging and trying to find sort of examples or trajectories that exemplify it, or actually testing that as well. But I think it's tied to some, I agree that you do present the fact that you present it as a bias, but I don't think it's a bias. I think it's centering yourself as a kind of a subject through whom we have autoethnography. This is not an autoethnography, but this is something like an alter autoethnography. You've got other people that you're testing out in a way that answer to the deepest questions of your own existence and understanding of aging. This is sort of how I saw it, because if you treat it as a hypothesis, then you have to ask the question that Ruben asked. Why don't we go rather looking for the negatives and say that, well, we didn't find any negatives, we found only positives. So it's not really a hypothesis. Just like you said, we will find these negatives as well. People, there are, and I totally agree with you that this is an opportunity. So it's more normative rather than you're trying to say this is a case that is universal or something like that. But also, if you look at it somewhat like, is this the condition? Is contemplation the condition? Do you need to be a contemplative of some kind to have this experience? Then also it becomes, the question is, what about ordinary people who lead ordinary lives, who actually experience this kind of some degree of completeness in their life, wisdom or individuation due to aging? So I'd say, it's something to think about, that centering yourself really as the point from which the choice of your selection sort of emerge seems to be making more sense in this case.
Well, I like the phrase alter ethnography. I do feel like that's true. But I also just want to say that when we talk about normal people who are not contemplatives in the traditional way, there's something to be said about the way contemplation is in their lives. Taking walks. I mean, people have dogs, people have cats. Sitting with their animals is a form of contemplation. I think sometimes cooking is a form of contemplation. Gardening certainly is. Hikes in nature. There are things that bring a lot of peace and time for reflection. And I think those moments can be really altering our sensibilities, our sense of consciousness. So we don't have to sit in 20 minutes or an hour meditation every day, although for some that is really important to have these experiences.
Thank you. May I just add a note regarding methodology? What Devashish described as this more intentionally including yourself in your description, seeing that these are somehow resonant with the kinds of themes that you have found in yourself, is I think that's a very valid and important way to lay out in your description. And so in that regard, I was looking at your bibliography, and I noticed that you had a work by Jorge Ferrer that was dated early 2000s. But Jorge Ferrer and then another colleague of his, Jacob Sherman, put out a book called The Participatory Turn, which has a much more detailed way of describing this kind of methodology. So I would like to suggest that if you could just look at that book, and then maybe if you need to make any tweaks regarding that description, precisely to include and be more intentional about what Devashish said, I think that book might give you some concrete ways of doing that. And then a second point regarding methodology is, well, someone who reads this, who is a woman, might ask, but these are two males, are we included? So at least to have that awareness that there is half of the human race that are not represented. But because we're talking about the human, to ask them, maybe this is a subject for future research by somebody else, but you define your limitations, saying for practical purposes, these are two males that have been chosen, but we also need to listen to women and how they grow old, how they age, and that's the subject of another study by somebody else. Maybe you could put it in that way, so that at least you delineate the self-reflective limitation of your study. Just a suggestion in that regard.
Thank you. Yes, yes. You know, a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was someone from CIIS who did a dissertation on aging, who interviewed Catholic nuns. And
yes.
So there has been some, I know there's work on that as well. And I understood that I interviewed 2 men.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
maybe you could include that study in your references and so on, and note precisely that you intentionally, or rather you are interviewing 2 men and are thereby leaving out half of humanity, but that's the subject for another research, or you could refer to some other bibliography in that regard.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah. So the power has just gone out here, but we're running on just batteries. So hopefully the power will come back on.
Thank you, Connors. That's it from me.
Okay, thank you, Debashish.
Okay, Connors, how many minutes do we have until your batteries run out?
It's pretty full, so I think we're okay.
Okay. This defense is also aging and moving towards its own extinction with empty batteries and time limits. Anyway, Connors, I think this was a very well done project. I really appreciated your presentation tonight, which was beautiful and contemplative, as Debashish already said. I think the whole work is really well written. I recommend anybody interested to reading it, because it's also so full of little gems. This was one of those dissertations where I just wanted to take little notes and quotes for future application in some way or another. And sometimes they were yours, sometimes they were your participants, sometimes they were from directly from the Buddha. So it's quite precious what you put together.
Thank you.
And well, I think the central question really, as both other committee members have already pushed in that direction, and maybe I'll do it in a slightly different way, is with these 2 exemplars that are not representative for any part of humanity, as was just pointed out, but that are exemplars of how aging can look. And that's, I think, what you try to show and share with the reader. You know, if you brought already some subjects, and maybe it's luck and it's a mystery and who gets to age well and to sort of grow in this particular way that is a softening, that is a letting go, that is an embrace of previously unseen parts, more wholeness, more flexibility, more playfulness. But the question still remains, how can we get there? Yeah, and so maybe it has something to do with the early building of trust and enough of a shelter and loving, environment, or maybe later we rework that and heal that in some way. But if you think about your maybe the traditions of your 2 contemplatives, but also of the Jungian lens that you used, if you think of it also from an individuation sense, what would you distill are some feature? What does it take to let the facing of mortality and of aging, in what particular way do we have to engage with that so it can soften us and mature us in this particular way, and not close us off and make us more anxious or angry or oppositional to what's going on? What do you think it takes that maybe these contemplatives have in their specific lives, in their specific traditions, or in their way of individuating through Jung's lens, that could be pointed towards? How have they engaged with the process that is different from, anybody going in a different direction with that?
One thing that comes to mind is that certainly these two individuals were drawn to their spiritual traditions in one way or another. Somehow something was enacted in them that made them wanted to pursue this more deeply. That's something that we can't make happen. When we think of individuation, even when someone consciously sets out to make the unconscious conscious by looking at the shadow, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come to a deeper understanding or acceptance of self. And so in some ways, what you're asking is almost like the third thing that emerges once there's a crisis. You could either do this or that, but then Jung tells us that, from the tension, something emerges that we never thought of before. And perhaps we can point people to that experience. Maybe that's sort of a light explanation or a light answer, but you're asking a question that in many ways, I can't answer. If I knew the actual solution, I think I would probably be, I don't know, sought out after all by many teachers all over the world, because we're dealing with human nature, and human nature doesn't always take to facing the shadow. And human nature has an option of contracting or expanding. And I think that sometimes we just have to make a decision. But one of the first images that came to me, Helge, when you were talking was when I see grandparents meeting a grandchild for the first time. And a grumpy stick in the mud suddenly becomes soft and open to this new life. I think also of, when someone, life is celebrated by family or friends, sometimes their sadness or isolation drops, and they realize, oh, I'm loved and appreciated. Mm-hmm. That's such a deep human experience. It's really hard to categorize. So I guess I'm pointing to these moments that can happen in our lives that we can't make happen, but they just happen. I do think there are people who are going to die, go to their grave being angry old grumpies. And for this, I wish them a better life or a better experience. One thing I learned in hospice work was that I couldn't change things. I couldn't make people not die. But I began to feel like I could let them have their death just by being with them. So I can let a grumpy person be grumpy. And I could let an enlightened person be enlightened. I don't have to manipulate it to what I want it to be or to what I think it should be. And I think that that's part of integrity or wholeness, is knowing that some people are going to die unhappy. So I've addressed in part the answer, your question, but I know I haven't been able to give the fullest of answers.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, if there was some magic manual that was easy to follow, right, you'd want your name on it. Let me ask you this way. It strikes me that, you know, some parallel between maybe somebody who has dealt with a shadow and who has been in a personal growth process of letting in life, their inner life, their outer life, accepting things on the terms that they come. Yeah, and whether that is in a, you know, personal growth process that is more of a Jungian analysis type, or whether that's in a spiritual contemplative tradition, it strikes me that an acceptance of what is sort of fundamental in both of their aim and both of their process. And maybe an acceptance of what is can ultimately soften us, right, in a way, and a turning away from a dissociating and wanting to distance ourselves from what actually is maybe more of the contractive move that you were describing earlier. Still easier said than done, certainly.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, you know, also culturally, you know, that you know, in this Western world that we live in this modernity, that there is really a, you know, sort of a turning away, a dissociation, a wanting to distance and buffer against the threat of death. And it's, you know, sort of for shadow or aging, right? All things related, you know, the entire fascination with youth in a way is pointing towards that dissociation, towards that turning away from what ultimately is the end. And, you know, can you sort of speculate? I know it wasn't part of what you're writing about. You know, what is a cultural learning here for you as a man of afoot, you know, with coming out of a Western culture with, you know, a deep appreciation for the East, and you've spent many years in Thailand, and you've interviewed these contemplatives from a, you know, Thai cultural and spiritual tradition. Are there any cultural learnings that you take away from all of this?
One thing that's almost ineffable, it's hard to point to it or to define it, but I see a lot of acceptance here that I don't see in the United States, for instance. And the spiritual traditions, the Buddhist spiritual tradition is just everywhere. It's all over. It's deep in the culture. And there's this sense of letting things be, and an emphasis on hanging out, on being with, that I don't experience as much in the United States. You know, here we live with sometimes unbearable weather and incredible rainstorms, and things get flooded very fast sometimes, and there are bugs and what they call jing jokes in the room. You live with these insects. Well, if you've lived in Asia, you know what I mean. And there's just this kind of letting it all be in some way or another. I don't have to chase the bugs out necessarily. There's a certain kind of living in the body that feels that I've noticed from the very first day I arrived here in Thailand, a certain kind of comfortability in the body that was so refreshing and new to me when I first came here, and continues to be. I mean, these are positive aspects of Thai culture. Obviously, it's not the only thing. There are some difficult things to accept, but these are some of the things I've noticed. But there's something about trust in nature that I feel in the culture. I was in a restaurant on the river, just a little Thai restaurant, and suddenly this torrential rainstorm came in with wind blowing all over, and all of the workers ran around and cleaned up everything and pulled all the tables in and closed the doors. And the rainstorm was gone in 10 minutes, and they opened everything up, and everything was, and there was no complaint whatsoever. There was just laughter. And I thought, that kind of shows a certain spirit of life here. So that's one thing. Those are some of the things I've noticed here in this culture. Also, there's a sense of community. People are very aware of each other and what's the common good, and very, very connected with families and wanting the family to thrive, so they're not so concerned about becoming a personal success. Maybe more so in Bangkok, which is more a Western city, but certainly here in the north. And of course, most of my students come from very poor backgrounds and are from the hill tribes of this area. So they've lived very different lives and lives of community. And that really seems to be imbued in their bodies. So these are some of my answers.
Okay, thank you. I'll pause here. Are there any follow-up questions that you would like to ask before we go on our in our small group retreat, Debashish and Ruben?
Well, if I may, just a thought just came to me. Well, the dissertation is a descriptive account, and so maybe after this, after the completion of this, you could think of writing one that is more prescriptive as to how not to grow old grumpy or something to that effect, reflecting the findings of this one, and that would be a bestseller. So anyway, just a thought that there is that thing that you could now work on based on what you learned from the study that might be helpful for those who are still like in middle age and they're looking at their old age, and they might be helped by that kind of book. So more of a popular kind of thing. Anyway,
would you like to collaborate on that?
Oh, that's a great idea. In fact, I'm just in the beginning of I'm beginning to consider a book called Zen and Aging, but I mean that's just a original title. So maybe that's right. This might be the birth of a new project together. So thank you. Anyway.
Thank you.
Okay, then Judy, could you put us into a breakout room? And while we're talking over there, the audience is welcome to share comments and questions and engage with Connors. And we'll be back probably in 10-15 minutes or so.
Oh, thank you, Connors. That was really just like Debashish and everyone said, like such a lovely contemplative journey you took us on. And yeah, does anyone have any questions for Connors or any comments they want to bring in? Yeah. Man.
Thank you, Connors. This was such a beautifully presented and deeply, compassionately presented as well. Your work is has been for many years now, so influential in my life. And I just wanted to congratulate you for a beautiful presentation. And I look forward to many more conversations with you on aging, as I myself am a crone. And if you're looking for a crone's perspective on aging, you and Ruben sometime, let me know. I'd be happy to work alongside you. Thank you, Connor.
I'd love that, Anne. Thank you so much, Anne. You've been such an enormous help for me. Thank you. I take it seriously, what you're saying. The crone. We need to listen to you and others.
I've only recently come into that knowing of that part of myself and embracing that. Yeah, your work has been informative on that road for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
I just wanted to also make a quick comment, Connors, because I, in New York City, worked at a community center for a while where we kind of like had activities for just the neighborhood, like, and there was like a whole senior program. And the playfulness that you spoke to was something that I witnessed with delight all the time. And it honestly like was so contagious for me to witness that energy. And I think it was just such a lovely, like, I appreciate you bringing that into this theme of aging, because I don't know that people notice as much maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, I've learned a lot in being through improvisation to be playful, and I feel like that has helped me a lot in being contemplative, you know, and reflecting on life. There's so much that comes up in play that bypasses our cognitive brain and just comes out as very human and very instinctual. And really is a wonderful way to connect with people. I mean, we used to do that a lot when we were kids, or at least if we were lucky, you know, playing with one another. And one of the things I've learned from my brothers and sisters is that when we're old, we can still play. And I've loved that part of our family, is the fun and playfulness. And it continues because many of us are over 60 now, if not all of us.
Hey, Johnny, it's Terry.
Hi, Terry.
Hi. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to listen to this. I think I have a better insight of what your dissertation is about, and I can't wait to see it published and get my hands on a book. And Mark and I really miss you. You look great.
So do you, Terry. Thank you.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi, Terry. I don't know how to communicate on this thing.
Unmute yourself.
Am I muted?
We can
No,
hear you, Peggy.
I can hear you.
You can go for it. Yeah.
Okay, John, what I want to know is, how old are you?
I'm 76.
That's what I thought. I was born in 1948, so there.
Peggy
Anyway,
and I
John.
are, just to let everybody know, this is my Irish twin, Peggy. We're the same age, 3 days a year, born within the same year. So,
Hi, everyone. Johnny, I just thought this was beautiful. I've been with you a lot while you were preparing for this, in the corner of my kitchen, and watching you was so inspiring. I mean, you were so dedicated, and you'd give me bits and pieces, and I was just totally into it, shall I say. But anyway, I'm wishing you the best. I think you did awesome, and you look very handsome, which we like to tell each other, right?
Right.
Anyway, I'll be talking to you soon, and so I'll be watching.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Peggy. Love seeing you.
Connors, I'll just echo what others have said about it was beautiful, contemplative, and inspiring. I think too, what's been inspiring to me is that you embarked on this journey already at advanced age. Not many people take on a doctorate at your age, and it's been an inspiration to me to see you do that, to engage in that, to continue to learn. So you're living so much of what described as helpful aging.
Well, you've been an inspiration to me, Gary, too, because you're one of these contemplatives that has used your health problems and your aging in a way that has expanded you as a human being and the way you continue to serve others. So I take inspiration from you too.
And Peggy.
Thank you. What others have said really resonates, especially the theme of this being so inspiring. And as someone who just had a hip replacement at the age of 35, I'm wondering how do you think that it might be possible to reach a larger audience regardless of age? And yeah, I think I'll leave the question at that, because maybe there's a subtext about ageism, like how will you in turn help younger generations or work towards eradicating ageism, but maybe that's not the task of your dissertation. So
well, I appreciate what you're saying, because Jung tells us doesn't give an age to when we're aging. There are what we call abrupt prohibitions, which obviously you experience with the hip replacement, that changes your life. And you're aware of it at your age. And that's the experience we're talking about. And so I would like to probably in bringing this information to the younger generations, I would talk to them about what are the shifts in consciousness that you have, because I honor that and appreciate that experience, and to see what the new challenge is and what are your new decisions at this point in your life. So I will think about that more, what you're saying, but do appreciate your comment.
thank you.
I see that the committee is back, so Helge.
Yes, thank you, Judy. I hope this was another fruitful conversation while we're gone. So we discussed, deliberated, and came to the conclusion to accept both your presentation and defense here today, as well as your written work. And it's my honor and joy to congratulate you, Dr. McConville. Well done.
Congratulations, Johnny.
Congratulations, Johnny.
Dr. Johnny.
Dr.
Oh,
Johnny.
yes.
Dr. John.
Congratulations, Dr. Johnny McConville Connors.
Dr. Connors.
Congratulations, Dr. Connors.
So wonderful, just wonderful.
So I hope now that the thesis is complete, you can write that bestseller about how not to grow old grumpy.
Look, I'm going to contact you, Ruben. Really, I am.
So,
well, I'm overwhelmed and full of joy and tears at the same time. So,
I am too.
So thank you so much once again to my committee and for your intelligence and expertise and academic work and kindness and your contemplative lives. So thank you very, very much. It means a lot to me.
Love you, Johnny.
Yes, Johnny, love you. Congratulations. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you, Connor. So we will require a few small minor modifications, largely based on what came up in the conversation, a further clarification, delineation in the methodology section, and or in your conclusion, some more reflection on the choice of the participants and further, your further thoughts on why you chose them and, speaking a little bit more about the limits or the specific situations on their own cultural and spiritual background and gender and so forth. So listen to the conversation again. I'm happy to clarify, or we all are. So if you can address those themes, there are a couple suggestions that Ruben also had for further sources to bring into this reflection. But it should all be relatively minor. Yeah, and I'm happy to touch base with you to clarify this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll take that to heart and get right on it.
Okay. Well, thank you. It was really a pleasure working with you these last, I looked it up earlier. It's been 5 years.
Yes.
And, yeah.
Right. What do you know?
What?